white lily flour.
Okay.
We're going to move on to baking powder. You can usually find an aluminum-free baking powder if you're concerned about aluminum. And baking soda. And then we have some kosher salt. I prefer white lily flour.
Okay.
We're going to move on to baking powder. You can usually find an aluminum-free baking powder if you're concerned about aluminum. And baking soda. And then we have some kosher salt. I prefer Morton's. If you use diamond kosher salt, it will be less salt. Clair Burton. Maybe I should just say chef cuisine and assistant general manager at Central Pizza and Bar in downtown Lafayette. Anytime I begin to work a recipe, especially buttermilk biscuits, I like to go ahead and get all my things. Call that creating our mise en place. So we've got our white lily flour. I'll tell you about that a little bit later, why it's important that it's white lily. We've got some aluminum-free baking powder, baking soda, kosher salt. Once I have all my dry things together, proceed forward with measuring it out into the bowl. Always nice to have a big soup spoon if your cup's too big for the little glass jar. So we're going to get 4 cups of white lily flour. You don't need to sift it. Sifting is not really as important as some recipes make it seem. However, if you do notice that there's some little lumps, you can just kind of lightly fill your cup instead of filling it all the way to the top. There are a lot of baking recipes that are super precise. Like, really, it's better to just weigh everything out. Buttermilk biscuits is happily not one of those recipes. There's a lot of room for forgiveness. There's also a lot of room for personal expression. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we get to the dough handling part. 2 tablespoons of baking powder. Now, baking powder is a kind of ingredient that you want to be as close to precise about. So you just get a little butter knife, fill up your tablespoon, and just pass the butter knife across the top of the spoon. Baking soda. We're going to do a half teaspoon of baking soda. And look, if your little teaspoon set is missing the half teaspoon, you can do what I'm doing here. And that is just like kind of half fill. You see how it's like, it's in the back corner and it's in the front lip. So that's about half. And we're going to go 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt. You can just kind of shake it and it'll just level itself out thanks to gravity. So we've got all of our dry stuff in there. Choose a hand, whichever one's your dominant hand probably, and go in and kind of just swirl it around. You could also get a whisk if you're not trying to get flour on your hands, but trust me, you will have flour on your hands shortly. So just give it a good little mix. If you do find any lumps of flour, just kind of break them up with your fingers. So it's a half cup of butter. Your standard pound of butter is 2 cups, so 1 stick. I did some pre-mise work and went ahead and diced my stick in advance. Again, so it could be super cold when it goes in. It's important that the fat remain cold. So I like a little, pretty small dice. And then using just your fingertips, you're going to kind of smush that butter into the flour. We call that cutting in the fat. And what we're doing really is kind of encapsulating all of the little flour, baking powder, baking soda, kosher salt in fat. And what that's going to do, obviously, lots of flavor, especially if you're able to get good quality butter, which of course you always should, and unsalted, right? Because salted butter is really just there for a preservative. You don't eat it, and it's going to mess with your salt. Salt is like an ancient preservative, right? There's whole studies that have been done on a global historical standpoint that salt's like the #1 preservation agent in ancient cultures. Also, it extends the life of things. I'm sure I've read about the science of it, but I think it's because it's like hygroscopic, so water and bacteria are kind of like repelled. So it just extends the shelf life. which is important in a post-industrial grocery supply chain. I mean, also if you're like a home baker and you happen to have a dairy cow and you're raising her responsibly, she's only going to make milk during the time that she's got a calf. So I can see how you would salt your own butter if you just had this one dairy cow. All right, so we've got our butter pretty well cut in. What you're looking for is it's going to kind of look like wet sand, if you will. Also, occasional pea-sized remnants of our fat being in there are totally okay. So here it is, looking like pretty much wet sand. And also, if you grip it together like that, you'll see that it kind of just forms a thing. And that's just because we've cut the butter in properly. And there's plenty of fat in there to provide flavor and also leavening when it steams. All right, we've got to get our buttermilk. Historically, certainly locally, I'm definitely known as like somebody who's like super proud of their biscuits. And it also like represents like the beginning of my like journey into culinary arts and culinary professional life. Learned how to make biscuits working in Northeast Georgia, so it's a pretty good indicator that the biscuit education that I was receiving was legit. So we've got our 2 cups of very well chilled buttermilk. I gave it a little shake. That's kind of like a superstitious thing though. You know, I figure like there's gonna be air bubbles in my buttermilk, so that means more air bubbles in my dough. Anyway, so cool thing about incorporating air into your buttermilk biscuits, which you'll see when we mix the dough, is that air is going to also kind of help our biscuits rise and be super beautiful and fluffy in a little while when it comes out of the oven. Oh, you know what? Let me turn the oven on. On 450. You know, we can talk briefly about like your choice of fat. So of course, yeah, butter is a great one, but you could also split that, and you could do half butter, half vegetable shortening, or 3/4 butter, 1/4 lard. Of course, there's always the mayonnaise biscuit when you realize there's not as much butter in the house as you thought. I guess other fun secret fact that you may or may not know yet in your life is mayonnaise makes a superior grilled cheese sandwich than butter. Nothing is crispier. All right, so when I went in to put my buttermilk into my dry ingredients, I made sure to keep my hand really spread. You can see that I only got dough like on my fingertips. And again, that feeds into my personal belief that the more air we can incorporate, the better. Furthermore, biscuits, unlike bread and so many other flour-based items, requires as little gluten formation as possible. Like the amount of gluten that we're forming is already reduced because of the white lily flour. White lily flour is a winter wheat flour and lacks the ability to form certain gluten proteins. So you're already protected from overworking your biscuit dough by your choice of white lily flour. Excuse me while I wash up my fingers. All right, so we've got our fantastic shaggy dough. You can see it's fluffy, it's shaggy, it's very wet. All great stuff. Hydration is important, again, for further leavening, because we are asking a lot of the baking powder to raise all that fat up in the air and hold it there. Okay. So you get whatever surface. You can just do it on your counter and scrape it down after. I like a cutting board because it makes for easy cleanup. Spoon out some flour. You can kind of rub it around. I like a pretty thick bed of flour, but again, like I believe in a really strongly hydrated biscuit dough. Here we go with another round of awesome dirty fingers. This is a great process for people who enjoyed playing with clay, making mud pies, Um, Gardening. I know that, well, I understand that gardening and playing in dirt releases all kind of like personal serotonins and oxytocins or whatever. I think dough does the same thing, which kind of just means it's anything you do with your hands. All right, so we've got our dough on the board. You can sprinkle on a good bit of flour because we've been very careful this whole time by choosing our winter wheat, white lily, to not overwork it. It's really soft. I like to kind of pat it out. Just tap your hands in your side flour to create like a dry surface between you and that very sticky, wonderful biscuit dough. So it's kind of like tapped out. Certainly haven't pressed out any air. I'm going to kind of gather it. It's so soft. Pat it into place. Again, kind of gently smoosh it out. Form it up in another fold. It's still so soft. It's wonderful. I'm trying to not add any additional dry flour because I feel like I've got enough extra flour in there that I don't want to mess with my balance of salt to fat and delicious tangy buttermilk ratio. Because if you do continue adding a lot of flour in, you will certainly dilute all of those flavors. So I guess we're in like our 5th or maybe 6th fold. My dough is still very soft. Let's see if I can kind of maneuver it like the Blob. Do y'all remember when the Blob filmed in Abbeville a million years ago? That was wild. So I'm gonna do one more fold. So shaggy and wonderful still. We're gonna kind of try and press it out to about 1 inch. I have lots of like visual muscle memories about what 1 inch looks like. So whatever. It can be 1 inch, it can be a little less than 1 inch. It can be a little more than 1 inch. That's fine. I happen to know how thick my fingers are, and so can use that as a guide. I will say that anytime I have the opportunity to make biscuits at home, it's always the most precious and wonderful process. In the past, I've had opportunities to make biscuits professionally, and you're working with like 4-pound butter volume. Remember, we just did 1/4 of a pound in this batch. So you can really like, I don't know if it's kind of witchy or earth magic-y to say that you can really work intention into your biscuit dough. Try and focus on like raising people up in your mind. And I think that all of that stuff comes through in the final result. We're gonna have a really tender crumb and a wonderful, because of some melted butter, kind of Popeye's biscuit crust. Let me wash up my fingers. All right, let's get a sheet pan to hold our beautiful little biscuits. And we've got our 4 tablespoons of butter over here in a little skillet, whatever, a tiny pot. Or you can even just put it like in a dish and microwave it until it's melted. Try not to like let it boil or whatever, because the whole butter aspect of it, I think, adds like a little bit more chance for some color on the top of the biscuit. Have you ever had a Bloody Mary with bourbon? I can't even remember what they call these things. I don't know if it's like a snapper or a Kentucky Mama. I don't know. So I've got our melting butter on like a low to medium to low temperature. So I had all that side flour. Kind of use your biscuit cutter. Let's see, what are things in houses that can function as biscuit cutters that are not biscuit cutters? Okay. If you're an industry person, you probably have quart containers around your house. You could cut the bottom off of that. It's important that it be open on the top, because if you just use a cup, like a regular cup, a glass, you're going to trap air in there. What you're going to do is that air is going to smoosh out the air that we've so carefully preserved in our biscuits. So it's important that it be like all the way open. So if you have like an old festival cup, just cut the bottom off. It'll be fine.
We used to have cans that we, like if you open the can, the sideways way with the like.
Yeah.
And then you cut the bottom off too. You just have like a little can, like a small can.
Oh yeah. Also, like a condensed milk can, you can just cut the top and the bottom off with your can opener, and then you have a handy dandy homemade biscuit cutter, cookie cutter. They're super versatile. So we've got our little guy floured. This also is important. It's important to go super straight down. We don't want to twist. We don't want to mash it. It's just like straight down. Straight down. You can see on the side how we've got like some area for some rising to happen. And we're going to get like a really cute side. It's really pretty. And also like pick up some additional texture. I like to put my biscuits like kind of just touching. Again, it goes back to that hydration thing and how it's like so important to like do everything we can to enhance that so that we get a great rise. I'm trying to keep my cuts like as close to each other as possible. An interesting like thing about how sometimes biscuits that you get out in the world are square. That's a couple of things. Like it increases like the surface area so it looks good on the plate. But also it allows for you to make super precise cuts and not have a lot of like leftover biscuit dough. Because another amazing fact about biscuit dough is the more cuts we make, the less tender they will be. And you'll see why in a second. So we're done making all of our like initial cuts. So these guys are going to be like the most tender. And then we'll kind of just gently gather up our remaining cuttings, kind of trying to skirt around any like pockets of flour on the board or whatever. So we kind of have like a gently gathered up scraps. We kind of just like super gently press it back out and get into like about a 1 inch. So again, just kind of kissing. And then like at this point, I would probably not really want to try and gather them back up again. And I might just kind of like tear chunks off, right? And kind of put them around the edge of my pan. And those will be like, you know, if you're doing this like for your family or whatever, they're going to need some kind of little snack before you actually sit down. So they can just have a little biscuit snack before they sit down for the meal. Biscuits are great. Another cool thing about being in Georgia is having gotten to talk to people who grew up in Georgia. So like further like at home biscuit culture stuff. I didn't really grow up in a biscuit household here in South Louisiana, other than like Hungry Jack or whatever. So let me get my melted butter. I have a little paintbrush over there. I just put some melted butter on top of these biscuits. This little paintbrush guy. I don't think it was ever used for paint. So we've got our butter melted. Again, we didn't like clarify it or anything. I kind of want those milk solids in there because they're going to brown really nicely. We're going to just go a little pat, 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 pat. Don't drag it across the top of your biscuit because air bubbles. Pat, 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 pat. I don't know that they use necessarily butter at Popeyes, but this is definitely the part that makes the Popeyes biscuit the best of the fast food drive-through, whatever, commercially available biscuits. And of course, like no shade on like a super flaky layered biscuit. That's a little bit of a different deal. Arriving at that biscuit over my style of biscuit or the style of biscuit that I adopted, more like the Southern biscuit where it's just like so tender. It's like really getting to find out like the size of the pillows that the cherubim used, okay? All right, so everybody's got a little bit of butter and there's just a little tad of butter left over. That'll come in handy when the biscuits come out of the oven. Okay. So here's our little biscuit guys. Oh, another random thing that new home bakers might not know. When you're baking stuff, if you put it in on a light colored surface, of course my sheet pan has a little age to it, so it does have kind of a patina, as it were. But a light colored baking surface doesn't add any additional browning, right? So it's just the heat and whatever fats you have present that are going to do the browning. If you use a dark surface, the bottom of your biscuits are going to color really fast. So beware of that. We're going to set the timer for 15 minutes. Okay, it's time to get those biscuits out of the oven. Let's see what we've got. All right, everybody, here we go. The moment of truth. Some nice golden brown buttermilk biscuits. And remember that little bit of leftover butter we had? Quick little whoosh, 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 whoosh. Oh, it absorbs immediately, just like good moisturizer. All right, and now it's time. Of course, I don't have to tell you guys that you can put biscuits with anything, savory, sweet. A lot of the people that I connected with in Georgia said like biscuits were a part of dinner every single night. All right. Ooh, it's so hot. I can't wait though. I can't wait. Oh, look at that fluffy goodness. I hope none of my language has been like super confusing for you guys. If it has, just like put a comment in the thing. I'm sure there's a thing for comments. Just put it down there and I'll try and answer them.